knowing more about football doesn't give you an edge in fantasy football. Knowing more about football does not give you an edge about fantasy football. I don't care what your uncle told you when you were watching the Philadelphia Eagles and the Giants game on the couch with him. I don't care. It means nothing. Mark's here. Hey, Mark. Did you know that you have an 8% chance to win your 12-team league? That's a rhetorical question. I know that you knew that, but I don't think a lot of our viewers and a lot of our listeners knew that. And that's an important piece of information that everybody needs to know about tonight's show. Because this is the one with the vital information. This is the one, Mark, that can help you win your league. This is the one that's going to make you a smarter fantasy player.
I didn't hear a freaking word you just said, Chris. I can't stop looking at the floating Falcons helmet. What the hell is going on there?
Okay, so for the people that are watching the show live right now, this is my Atlanta Falcons hover helmet, and look, I got it for I dropped a 60 pound on it. So I'm like, hey, it's typically like $80, and I'm like, got it for $20 cheaper. I'll take it.
You dropped a 60 pound? 60 pounds of what?
60 pounds of dollar bills, Mark. Just go with it here.
Do you have any idea how much money 60 pounds of dollar bills is?
You know what? I'm not into international currency. I don't want to get into that with you. We are not discussing international currency on the Roto Bros podcast.
Chris, I am not discussing international currency. I'm discussing if you weighed out 60 pounds worth of US dollar bills. That's a decent amount of money. Anyway, I think I think the floating helmet is so cool. Send me a Snapchat of it. I want to see what it looks like on like not a live stream, but like a phone screen. Anyway, yeah, my biggest thing is like it's August. It's time to start drafting for home leagues. I have a home league draft coming up in about a week here, and I don't know. We've talked so much about players, everything is a player take, a nuanced player take, and we get it. There's nuance to fantasy football, and that's fine. But I think there is so much more actionable information out there just on structuring your lineup to win a fantasy league. And it's not just, I like this player in the 6th round, so I'm drafting this player in every draft, or I don't like this player in the 6th round, so even if he's there in the 8th round, I'm still not taking him. Like, I think there's just something to the structural strategies of a fantasy draft. Like you win your league in different ways. You don't win your league by being right about players. You win your league by developing or building leverage against your teammates and finding your edge, establishing that edge, and utilizing it to the best of your abilities. And I think the biggest edge you can possibly have is just being able to recognize when your league mates are making mistakes and exploiting them to the absolute best of your abilities.
Yeah, and you mentioned, and I'll give the credit here to you. You brought this whole discussion up, and I think a lot of people thought that we would probably actually disagree on this, but we didn't. We surprised everybody, and we actually agree for the most part, like almost wholeheartedly on this topic. There's little gray areas that we'll get into in a minute, but for the most part, we're walking hand in hand here, and we talk a lot of, especially in the Roto Bros Fantasy Advice Lounge, which you can check out. You see it scrolling across your screen, live viewers. Patreon.com/Roto Bros. Get on it. But we talk a lot about it in the Fantasy Lounge, and we talk a lot about it on this show and then our sister pod, Darkly Dreaming Dynasty, and I do it even on the Mind of McConnell shows. Like we talk about this pretty much everywhere you and I are, because we are the highest IQ fantasy podcast in the industry. And this is important information.
You are so full of yourself, aren't you?
You know what, Mark? I just think that sometimes you just got to pat yourself on the back, and I think it's okay to do it. So we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And you're right. It's not just about player evaluations and watching all the tape and figuring out you guys know, everybody that knows me knows, I love watching the tape and figuring out what these guys do well, okay? skill-wise, what they don't do well, what they need to improve on, schemes that they look like they would fit well, and it's fun for me. I enjoy it. I like it, and I like giving people that information about things that players are good at on tape. But just because a player is good on tape does not mean they're A, going to succeed in the NFL, and B, that they're going to be a good fantasy player. So just because you have a favorite player or a player plays on your team or there's any sort of reason for bias at all on a specific player does not mean that is who you should get. Just because you are a Saints fan does not mean you need to go out and make sure that you add Traquan Smith, okay? That's not how you win in fantasy, okay? But like you said yesterday, we had this discussion in the Fantasy Lounge, and again, we talk a lot about player evaluations in there, and those are fun and all that kind of stuff, and it's interesting, and it moves the needle, and it makes for good content. But again, you can't base your winning strategy on, oh, this guy looks good on film, or, oh, this is really one of my favorite players. I think he's going to bust out. Let me go ahead and draft him. A lot of it, most of it's about the ADP. Like, where are you going to take this player? Like, that player that you like very, very well may break out. Like, I love Nico Collins. I think his film is awesome. I think he's great on tape. He's great. He's obviously been great in training camp. But I'm not going to sit here and go into a draft, no matter what format it is, and go into it and saying, I'm leaving this draft with Nico Collins. Like, that's not the way that you gain an edge over the other 9 or 11 players in your league. And so and even the other players in if you're playing in best ball. That is not the way to do it. That is a what we like to say a negative EV way to play fantasy. But what you and I are trying to do is teach people, both on this show and on any of the shows and in the lounge, how to do a better job at gaining an edge. And for the most part, you and I see it, I think, similarly. But there are some things that we kind of have to break free of. I think we kind of have to separate out just a little bit and explain for people, and that's kind of what this show tonight is all about, I think.
I know I got a lot better at quantifying my edge in seasonal leagues and dynasty leagues, and best ball for that matter, when I started getting a lot better at DFS, when I learned what the real theory behind being a successful DFS player is, and it's not researching football. It's not researching basketball or researching baseball. It's all about exploiting your opponent's weaknesses. If you can predict what your opponents are going to do, you have an edge. Football especially, but baseball and basketball not so much. Basketball, when it comes to like projection, everything is very efficient, and baseball is very fragile. NFL projections can get pretty fragile because this is a random sport. If Henry Ruggs could be projected for 8 fantasy points and then catches a 75-yard touchdown, now on DraftKings that massively spikes his scoring. So he's going to have a 75th or 85th percentile outcome just based on one play. That's just how random football can be, is one play can completely crush a player's median projection. And like embracing that variance, I think first and foremost is one of the biggest edges you can find, but we've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Just it's so important to be able to at least try to predict what your opponents are going to do. You have a better chance of predicting what your opponents are going to do in a fantasy draft than you do predicting what's going to happen on a football field on Sunday. 100%. Like you have a much stronger chance of being able to predict what your opponents in a fantasy draft are going to do, especially in a home league where, you guys are playing for money. Like this home league I have coming up, it's like a $50 winner take all. So yeah, it's only a $50 investment, but with my baseline win probability of 8%, I need to be making decisions that increase that win probability and increase the expected value of my entire roster. So I know that I have an edge in this league, one, because I've been drafting best ball since May. I know where I have a great idea where players should be going in a draft, and I am more prepared to exploit the mistakes that my league mates are going to make in a draft. Like, let's just say hypothetically, on Underdog right now, T. Higgins goes at the 4-5 turn right next to Jamar Chase. Let's just say Jamar Chase goes in the third because of rookie hype or camp buzz or whatever. I need to be able to exploit that mistake that player just made somehow. That mistake could be waiting an additional round and then taking T. Higgins and getting T. Higgins later. Or if I'm drafting at the turn, like I live in Chicago, 10 out of the 12 players in this league, including myself, are Bears fans. The only thing is I'm not going to make suboptimal decisions based on the Chicago Bears. I'm not going to reach a round and a half above ADP to get David Montgomery. I'm not going to do that for Justin Fields. I'm not going to do that for Allen Robinson
or Darnell Mooney.
Or Darnell Mooney or Cole Kmet. That's going to happen in this league. I can tell you right now that any Chicago Bears player, I can expect that they are going to get drafted at least one round ahead of ADP. There's also a Lions fan in this league, and I know that he is going to make suboptimal decisions by reaching for players like TJ Hawkinson. I can go into this draft assuming I'm not going to get TJ Hawkinson, because if I try to draft him at cost, he'll already be gone. So I need to and TJ Hawkinson is one of my highest owned players in best ball. Like, I think he is such a high probability to smash and could have massive win rate potential if he truly breaks out and is able to command 130 targets on this offense, just because he's got no competition for them. But I need to be able to let TJ Hawkinson go. I can't go into this draft and go, well, he's a 6th round pick, but I need to get him before this Lions fan does, so I need to draft him in the 4th round. No, that's a suboptimal decision. You are forfeiting your edge at that point. Your edge is going to be in this guy taking TJ Hawkinson 2 rounds above ADP just because he's Joe Lions fan or because he's Joe Bears fan. That's what I mean by quantifying your edge. You need to figure out what these players are going to do, because it's not that difficult. This isn't a best ball draft on Underdog where you're drafting with people who have like I have like 100 teams on Underdog right now. So I've drafted a decent amount, but there are guys out there with 1,000 drafts in their belts. That's who you're drafting against when you draft on Underdog. That's why ADP is so efficient, and we can trust that is where players should be going. When you're drafting with your league mates on ESPN.com, that is not where players should be going. That ADP is inefficient. So that's why I think like you can set yourself up for success in August by getting in on drafts in May. That's kind of what I'm saying. It's a little late for that now, but that's good information for the future. But you can also use that brings me to my next point is consensus rankings aren't going to help you that much in a draft. You know what can help you? Getting ADP from the most efficient source that you can find and using that as leverage against your league mates who are going to have ESPN.com's ADP printed out. Yeah, that happens in this home league that I'm in. This home league that I'm in, it's a live draft. We all get together at my buddy's house and we draft. We have the big board and everything. It's the only draft I have that does this. And he literally prints out ESPN.com consensus ADP and rankings for everyone to use. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to use Underdogs because I believe Underdogs is significantly more efficient and I will have an edge using it while everyone else is using something completely different. I can still use ESPN.com's rankings to try and predict what my opponents are going to do in this draft.
Yeah, and that's an important piece, I think, to the puzzle, because a lot of people are just going to say, and I can't tell you, and this kind of segues into kind of what I wanted to mention, I can't tell you how many people have DM'd me on Facebook, on Twitter, and they're like, hey, where's your ranking sheet at? Now, for those of you who, I do make rankings, and I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you how, but before I do, there's a lot of people that ask for these rankings, and I've been doing them for years, you know, and but I do them a different way. And so, but lately what I've been doing is I've been putting them in the RotoBros Fantasy Lounge. So if you're not a member of the Fantasy Lounge, go to patreon.com/RotoBros. Check it out. We've got a rankings channel. That's where they're at. I keep them updated, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, but the way that I do it is a little bit different. Because what I'm doing is I'm looking at these players, I'm looking at these rankings, and look, they're updated. It's not just one printout that I send you in, you know, that I release in like on May 1st, and then it's never touched again. Look, Michael Thomas is going to be out 6 weeks. I guess he's still my wide receiver 4. No, it's updated, right? So, but these are not rankings. A lot of people are going to take those ESPN rankings, like you said, those Yahoo consensus rankings. And before I go any further, all those rankings, folks, throw them in the garbage because they're all the same. They're all the same. There's hardly any differences. Everybody has essentially the same top 10 running backs. They're switched a little bit. Maybe one guy's moved up and you're like, oh, that's kind of strange. For the most part, they're all going to look the same, okay? You don't even need to use those. Do not go based off that because, again, like Mark said, in those home leagues, the majority of those players that don't know any better, that aren't sharp fantasy players, they're just casual fantasy players, they're going to be doing the same thing. So it's a waste of your time to do that. You're not gaining any sort of edge. So the way that I create mine is when I'm building these rankings, I'm looking at, okay, what is the ceiling? What is the floor? What is the median? In other words, like a range of outcomes for these players. And I'm looking, okay, what can possibly happen for these players? I'm not just looking at the ceiling. I'm not just looking at, can a certain player finish as the number 1 player at their position? I'm looking at, what are the odds based on the situation, based on the scheme, based on the changes of the offense, based on situations, offensive line, whatever, what have you? What are the odds that this happens? What are the odds that this is the end game for this player? Okay, so it's not just about, is it in his range of outcomes? It's about, what are the odds that this range of outcomes comes to fruition? Okay, and so mine are a little bit different. So when I build my rankings, my rankings are based off of where I believe players are going to finish the season. Now, but that isn't just enough. When you're drafting, if you're using mine, great. I'm flattered, but I urge you to do what Mark said and use Underdog ADP, use Fantasy Data ADP, use fantasy football, whatever you got to do. Use ADPs that are different than. You draft with ADPs. Don't just draft with consensus rankings because that's dangerous. You're not gaining an edge. Gain an edge a different way. You gotta kind of go off script from what everybody else in your league is doing. And I guarantee you, even in some of those leagues that you're in with sharper players, they're not all doing that same thing either. Okay, you're not going to have the same edge that you would in obviously a home league with all the casual guys. But you still may be able to create an edge, and it's not just the only way to create an edge. We're giving you multiple ways to do so. But that is a really important thing that you brought up, and I'm glad you brought up the whole ADP thing. No matter where you're getting them, I think it's important to use those in unison with whatever rankings you're going off of. But I would highly recommend people not use ESPN and Yahoo consensus rankings.
Yeah, I mean, your best use for those is literally just using them as a predictive measure for what your opponents are going to do. Like if you're drafting, let's say you've got the 10th overall pick in a 12-team league, and let's just say it's the 9th round. All right, I have T. Higgins. I took T. Higgins at the 4-5 turn or wherever. Now I want to get my quarterback. It's the 9th round. I should probably start considering Joe Burrow so I can get the stack, whatever. And if you're drafting 10th, you can look ahead at your 11th and 12th picks in that league. You can look at their teams and think to yourself, like, all right, what can I hypothesize these guys are going to do based on who they've drafted and who is coming up on ESPN's rankings? Because they're using these rankings. You look ahead and they're like, okay, Joe Burrow is still like 8 spots down in these rankings. Both of these guys, or at least one of these guys has a quarterback. So you can kind of create a probability in your head, like, all right, one of these guys already has a quarterback. He's not taking Joe Burrow. The other guy doesn't have a quarterback, but Joe Burrow is still 8 spots down in the rankings. So instead of taking Burrow in the 9th, I can take another running back. I can take another wide receiver, and I can hope that Joe Burrow is still there 4 picks from now when I pick again. That's just a small way to gain an edge in a draft, just using ESPN's rankings. You're not going to use them for yourself. You're literally just using them to try and predict what somebody else is going to do. There's been a lot of work done this offseason just throughout the industry, and quite frankly, I think it's awesome. People have been analyzing best ball win rate a lot. You can there are flatter win rates across seasonal leagues. ESPN.com has those as well. I think Sleeper is working on them as well too. But win rate to me is just so important, and I think it's kind of similar to RPV, what you guys have pushed in the Black Book. We kind of talked about that in the Discord yesterday because I didn't know a ton about RPV. I haven't read it, or I haven't read about it, but I think it's similar to win rate, except, obviously RPV is going to take into account median projection for the coming season and everything, but win rate can tell you a big story just with these players. And I think moving on to our next point into finding an edge is that you need to be doing everything you possibly can to increase your win rate or your win probability. And if you start the draft before you've even taken anybody with a baseline win rate of 8%, you need to be making plus EV decisions that increase that win probability. And I know NBC Sports Edge has done a lot of work on this about drafting running backs with legendary ceilings. Pat Kerrane specifically, if any of you guys follow him, elite follow in the fantasy industry if you don't. But he actually wrote an article recently about this, and I think there is so much actionable information in that article. Chris, let me ask you this. Who in your eyes in the, let's say, first 5 rounds of a fantasy draft, first 5 rounds, so you can pull up consensus ADP or whatever you want. I'm just going to consider Underdog because I know Underdog's ADP like the back of my hand at this point. Give me every running back that you think could post a 35% win rate like Christian McCaffrey did in 2019.
This season in PPR?
Yes. This season in PPR, give me every running back that you think could post a win rate like that. Because the only way they're posting a win rate like that is if they score 350, 400, 450 fantasy points. They have to have a monstrous season, or they need to be drafted in like the 17th or 18th round, or maybe even the 14th, and score like 250 or 300 fantasy points. That's the only way they're posting a win rate that high. So let's kind of stick to the higher capital draft picks and talk about those guys and how you can make a plus or negative EV decision in the first couple of rounds of your fantasy draft.
Yeah, I think I want to preface something because I think a lot of people that are listening or watching this, I think one of the guys that's probably going to be on their list, they're just going to start naming all these great running backs, and then they're going to get to Derrick Henry and just automatically say, Derrick Henry. It's not in Derrick Henry's range of outcome. It's not. He doesn't catch enough passes. Okay, it is not in his range of outcomes to be that running back and do the thing that Christian McCaffrey did and post that sort of win rate and have that, or for those of you that read the Black Book, have that sort of RPV advantage over every other running back in the class. The guy ran for 2,000 yards, and he wasn't even the number one running back in fantasy football when he did that. So it's like that tells you right there he does not have that in his range of outcomes. Additionally, in a year where he's another year older. So it's only getting less likely that someone like Derrick Henry would have that. But my choices, Mark, would obviously be Christian McCaffrey. I think he could do it. He has the ability to do it again. I think Kamara has it. I think Cook has it. And I think Antonio Gibson is a guy I think that we've talked about. We both think he has that ceiling. And I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't know where you're at on this, and a lot of people just seem to forget about him for some reason. I think Aaron Jones has this in his range of outcomes now.
Absolutely.
Now, again, we know we both like Kylan Hill as a guy that maybe 2022 and beyond could become, either, maybe a guy that, takes a lot of work from Aaron Jones, or at the very least takes the majority of the pass catching work. We don't know if that could happen this year. A.J. Dillon would have to get hurt, but that's probably not going to happen in 2021. A.J. Dillon's not going to be the main pass catcher, okay? Jamal Williams was, by many, viewed the main pass catcher in that backfield, and he still didn't affect Aaron Jones all that much, okay? So now that he's gone, this is only going to be an even better thing for Aaron Jones. Good offensive line, great offense, great weapons, Hall of Fame quarterback. You know that the running game's going to be, this is going to be a good football team. They're going to score a lot of points. The quarterback's going to be in the MVP discussion for the most part. The wide receiver's going to be, Devontae Adams is going to be, close to a league winner in fantasy almost, at that position at least. And so Aaron Jones has everything set up for him. There's no excuse for Aaron Jones not to have that league-winning upside that Christian McCaffrey did. Now, what are his odds? His odds are probably not as good, obviously, as Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook, okay? But I do think his odds are just as good, if not greater, than Antonio Gibson's. And going to Antonio Gibson, he would be the only other guy. I don't think it's in Jonathan Taylor's. It's tough. I mean, I kind of want to say Austin Eckler. I kind of want to, but I'm not going to. Barkley, I think it's in his, but the problem with Barkley is he's got to overcome these offensive line woes, okay? Now, we've seen guys finish as high-end RB1s that have bad offensive lines. Barkley obviously has the talent to do that. But I don't, that's going to be his biggest obstacle. But you're talking about guys like Kamara and Cook and McCaffrey. These guys have better offensive, and Aaron Jones, these guys have better offensive lines. It's not in Joe Mixon's. It's not in Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's. It's not in Nick Chubb's, and I think we kind of discussed that, and I'm kind of leaning toward your side now to where it's really not, just because he doesn't have, that ability to catch all those passes. Maybe even with Kareem Hunt hurt. So,
a 95th percentile outcome for Nick Chubb. Like, he has the absolute stone best season of his career. He just has Derrick Henry's 2020 season. Like that,
yeah,
that I think that's as good as it can get for Nick Chubb. If Kareem Hunt were to get hurt, yes, Nick Chubb's ranges of outcomes change, but I don't know if they change that much. Like, does he suddenly go from a 15 reception player all the way up to like a 60 or 70 reception player? Probably not. Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
He could maybe command 40 targets, but that's not going to be something stupid that absolutely wins you a league. You've mentioned some, so I was having a discussion with myself in the car on the way home, and I said, like, literally just by myself, and it was all about, players and the running backs that I thought had that in their range of outcomes where they could just have 400 plus fantasy points. They could have the Christian McCaffrey, Todd Gurley, David Johnson-esque season. And obviously Christian McCaffrey's already done it. He's got it in his range of outcomes. I don't know if Dalvin Cook does. I don't want to put Dalvin Cook there. I think we've already seen his 75th and 85th and 95th percentile outcomes, and he can have a monster season, and he is objectively still a good draft pick at the 1.2. So I wouldn't criticize anyone for taking Dalvin Cook, even though I don't think he has a Christian McCaffrey-esque season in his range of outcomes. And the big reason for that is he's not like a 90 or 95% snap share player. He never has been. When he's commanding as much usage as he possibly can, he's commanding like 70% snaps, 65% snaps, 75% snaps. A lot of the work, don't get me wrong, but he's a good pick, but he's not the Christian McCaffrey pick. I think Ezekiel Elliott does have it in his range of outcomes. Like, we all love Tony Pollard as, a late round running back dart throw, but if Ezekiel Elliott came out and played 95% snaps and had like 90% of the running back touches this year for the Cowboys, none of us would be surprised. We would be like, how did we not just draft Zeke at the 1.2 all day long? Yeah. Alvin Kamara, yes. I agree with you on Alvin Kamara, only because he could literally be set up to touch the football more times than he ever has in his career. And he's probably going to see 100 targets again. It's always been the carries for him. He's got a goal line role, but he's never really had like a 250 carry season, and he could have that in his range of outcomes this year. So I agree with you on Alvin Kamara. Jonathan Taylor, I don't think has it, but he does have a Dalvin Cook-esque ceiling where like it could be like week 2 or week 3. And the same thing with Antonio Gibson, because Jonathan Taylor and Antonio Gibson are in like the exact same situation in this regard. It could be like week 3 and Nyheim Hines or JD McKissic could be commanding a bunch of targets and catching passes and averaging like 4 or 5 yards per target. And then Jonathan Taylor and Antonio Gibson, who are 230 pounds each and each run like a 4.3, they could just be getting 2.5 targets a game and taking them to the house because they're so freaking explosive that the coaching staffs could just be like, we're done. We're done with Nyheim Hines. We're done with JD McKissic. We're just going to keep giving this freak athlete as many targets as we can. And Jonathan Taylor suddenly has a path to 60 or 70 targets, or Antonio Gibson has a path to an even greater amount of targets because he's got a proven receiving skill set because he did it in college. So I would actually put Jonathan Taylor in that Dalvin Cook ceiling. Like, his ceiling is what Dalvin Cook's is. Everyone keeps saying that Jonathan Taylor's ceiling is Nick Chubb's. I disagree.
No,
we've got a 2-season sample of Jonathan Taylor being an efficient pass catcher. We know he can do it. We know he can do it. So I don't think it's just, I think it's a little unfair to just assume, all right, Jonathan Taylor's Nick Chubb. No, Jonathan Taylor's ceiling is either Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott. So I still think Jonathan Taylor at the 1-2 turn is an elite pick because his ceiling is monstrous. But Antonio Gibson's ceiling might actually be higher, and that's why I endorse taking him. What about Najee Harris? Because I think he's going to be more of a lower variance player. Like, his floor is probably as safe as any player you can get in the second round of a fantasy draft. I don't know if the elite ceiling that could win you a fantasy league is there, especially because you have to take him in the second round. So there's not, I don't know what kind of value I'm getting.
Yeah, there's three interesting players here to me. And I think and those players, just so everybody knows, we'll get into that. Joe Mixon, Austin Eckler, Najee Harris. Because Najee Harris, to me, everybody, it's no secret. Najee Harris in redraft leagues, he's typically my number 2 pick on the turn. If I'm going to get a running back in the second round that is going to get more than likely he's going to get 300 plus touches. He's definitely getting 270 plus. Okay, even 270 plus touches is enough for you to typically be a rock solid RB1. But if he approaches 350, like I kind of think that he will, man, look, he's got to stay healthy. And there's an extra game. Okay, I know we're worried about the offensive line, but we've seen running backs do this all the time with less than stellar offensive lines. It's the touches for me. It's the opportunities. I don't think he's got the McCaffrey season in him. I don't think he's got that 2019 McCaffrey season. I don't. But that doesn't mean that he's not an excellent choice to be the RB1 on your squad, or of course the RB2 on your squad. It just means you need to sort of keep in mind that he's probably not going to be able to ever reach that particular summit. And it's a hard thing to do, right? Like, not everybody can have those seasons like McCaffrey in 2019 and Tomlinson in 2005, like 2005, 2006. Like, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. I don't think it's in Joe Mixon's either. I don't. Now, I love Joe. I think Joe Mixon, from a skill standpoint, is one of the most highly skilled running backs in the league. But again, he struggles with injuries. He always seems to be banged up, so he's got to get over that. The offensive line, obviously, we have a lot of questions about that. I also don't think Joe Burrow is going to be dumping off a lot. I think Joe Burrow is going to be one of the least I think Joe Burrow is going to have those dump offs. In regards to quarterbacks, he's going to be one of the quarterbacks that does it the least. So, like, I don't know if these tons of like Kamara-ish or Austin Eckler-ish dump offs are going to be in store for Joe Mixon. And I don't know. I think this offense is going to be much better. I think they're going to score some points. I think this is going to be a competitive team because they're going to be throwing a lot, and hopefully Burrow's healthy. But I still don't think it's in his range of outcomes, regardless of the fact that I do believe he is going to be a full-fledged workhorse in this backfield. And, of course, Austin Eckler, he's going to get the targets. There's no question about that. The problem with Eckler, to me, is he's going to be on a good offense. He's going to get the targets. He's going to get the carries. And talent-wise, he's good enough to do it. But he's never been a goal line back. And now, look, he didn't need that to finish as a top 5 running back. But there is a difference, Mark, between, as we know, there is a difference. There's a cliff between RB1, maybe sometimes RB2, and then the rest of the field. Like, that top flight RB1, that Christian McCaffrey season, you are just head and shoulders above every other running back. And I don't think that's going to be in Eckler's range of outcomes either. So those 3 guys, I'm going to say no. I think it's close. I think all 3 could finish as top 5 running backs. I think that is absolutely possible for all 3 of them. I don't think the McCaffrey season, the Tomlinson season is the greatest season ever, so I won't even try to compare it to that. But the McCaffrey season, yeah, I just don't think it's going to be there.
There's a couple more guys that I think have it in their range of outcomes. The based on the way I've been drafting Travis Etienne, you might think that I believe it's in his range of outcomes, and it's probably not, because he's probably just going to be splitting so many of the goal line carries with James Robinson, at least for a decent chunk of the year. Assuming by like week 8, Travis Etienne could have a stranglehold on that entire backfield and be a 90% snap share guy, but not having that early in the season is going to affect his win rate significantly. Miles Sanders, I think, again, he could have a Dalvin Cook-esque ceiling or a Joe Mixon-esque ceiling, but it's not a McCaffrey-esque ceiling.
We're about to agree on this. We're about to agree on this next one, I think.
There's 2 more guys. One of them we're probably not going to agree on, but the one that I want to spend the most time talking on, it's DeAndre Swift.
Yes!
It's DeAndre
Swift.
And I keep seeing in the fantasy land of people fading DeAndre Swift because the Lions are going to be bad. He's going to be competing with Jamal Williams for touches. And it's just like, you people are out of your minds fading DeAndre Swift.
I will smack you on the hand. I will smack you on the hand.
I won't, because I get it. He's going to be an extremely high variance player. His 25th percentile outcome is like 6 fantasy points or 8 fantasy points per game, because he's only getting like 8 or 9 carries and 5 targets, which is decent. But like on a bad offense, he's going to need to be pretty freaking efficient to make that work. But his ceiling is Christian McCaffrey. Like, yes. we could reach a point where the Lions coaching staff is just like, what the hell are we doing with Jamal Williams? This DeAndre Swift dude is explosive. He's one of the best pass catching running backs in the league. He's elusive. Like this guy does everything we need him to do and more. We've got nothing else out on the football field. Who else are we going to throw it to? We can't throw it to TJ Hawkinson 200 times. That's not going to work. We've got wide receivers that can't separate or command any targets. We need the guy who can actually be relied upon. Like this could happen. I'm not saying it will. I'm not trying to predict outcomes here. I'm just saying this could happen. This is well within DeAndre Swift's range of outcomes. He could be the next Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I think there's probably going to be a lot of people when they're driving around listening to this tomorrow, or when they're watching right now. They're like, DeAndre Swift. Look, what is the Lions offense? The Lions they're not going to be a good football team, but what do they have going for them? A more than solid offensive line. Okay, what should be a more than solid offensive line. Okay, we're left to assume that. And a quarterback that has dumped off in the past. Like, Jared Goff has shown he is not afraid to do that. You've already mentioned the pass catchers. You can't look. We think TJ Hawkinson's gonna break the glass ceiling in a way at tight end. Like, he's gonna be probably one of these positional advantages at tight end because of the target share. But he's not gonna catch every pass. Right? Like, is Amon-Ra St. Brown going to be a rookie sensation? He's probably going to start, but he's probably not going to be a rookie sensation. He's not going to be Justin Jefferson. We've read the book on Brashad Perriman. We know how the story ends on Tyrell Williams. Quintez Cephas doesn't look like he's even, he's barely with the twos. So it's like, who else? Oh, DeAndre Swift. So DeAndre Swift is going to see a ton of touches and a ton of receptions. I don't know, a lot of people are looking, well, what about Jamal Williams? Well, Jamal Williams, again, was in Green Bay, and he never moved the needle for Aaron Jones. He never affected Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones was perfectly fine all 3 seasons since Aaron Jones has broken out. So I don't want to hear Jamal Williams. DeAndre Swift is miles ahead of Jamal Williams when it comes to overall skill. And DeAndre Swift, I'll tell you right now, DeAndre Swift is a more skilled running back than Aaron Jones. But I think we're going to see that this year. DeAndre Swift has almost 0 weaknesses. This is a guy that could do it all, and you're right. Just because it's a bad offense does not mean that it's bad. The Jaguars were a bad offense last year, and James Robinson, an undrafted rookie free agent with a bad offensive line and bad quarterback play, was just fine. Okay, we see this happen. So you don't have to have a running back on a bad offense. And let me tell you something. If I'm drafted with the 1-1, Mark, I don't think a lot of people realize it. If I'm drafted with the 1-1 and I'm hoping that I get, I can pair McCaffrey, who's the consensus 1-1. If I'm hoping I can pair McCaffrey with another running back on the turn, DeAndre Swift's going to be there. You're getting DeAndre Swift in the 3rd round right now. I've been drafting 10, 11, 12, and I'm getting him in the 3rd round nearly every single time. So you could get him in the 2nd round with the first pick in the 3rd. If you're drafting 1-1 and you already take McCaffrey, that's 2 running backs that have this league-winning ceiling. Like, that's huge. You know what I mean? And imagine if you are a guy, I don't know what the odds of this are, but imagine if you were the guy with 1-1 and you get both of these guys, Mark, and it happens for both. They're both top 3 running backs. Imagine that. Like, this is not crazy the odds of this happening are actually better than what people think.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And then I'm so glad that we can kind of hold hands here with DeAndre Swift because, like, I get it. It's a low probability because the Lions are bad, but like there is a legitimate range of outcomes here where he just plays 90% snaps because he's so good.
Yeah.
And the coaching staff is seeing Jamal Williams and they're like, yeah, we like this guy, but we can't do with him what we can do with DeAndre Swift. And like the Lions, I don't think the Lions are going to tank. They could, I don't know, but just knowing what I know about Dan Campbell, like I don't think that's in his vocabulary at all. I think Dan Campbell is going to do whatever he has to do to try and win every week. I mean, I see him making a ton of suboptimal decisions, but I could be wrong. He might not. I don't know.
Well, he's also old school. He's also an old school guy. So that kind of lends hope to me. I'm like, okay, he's an old school guy. He's probably making suboptimal decisions. So maybe he doesn't want to kind of go with the rest of the NFL. Maybe he wants to be the old school guy and stick to one workhorse running back. For fantasy purposes, I certainly hope he does for my 3rd round pick in DeAndre Swift.
DeAndre Swift has to be the player that in every draft, DeAndre Swift and probably Bryan Edwards, that I am just most likely to reach around above consensus to take or just above consensus in general. Like DeAndre Swift, you get at the 3-4 turn, but there are times where it's like the early 3rd round and just based on my lineup construction, because like, all right, I drafted in the middle of the 1st round, so I took Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill. And then in the 2nd round, it's just like, oh, I've got A.J. Brown or who's another wide receiver that goes, Justin Jefferson or whatever. I've got 2, or DeAndre Hopkins. I've done that a lot. I've started Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, or Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins. I started that in Underdog like 100 times. So I almost always take DeAndre Swift like a few rounds above consensus, even though there are probably better picks in a vacuum available. I take Swift because he could be a genuine hero RB. He could be a low floor player, and I'm absorbing that risk because I think the ceiling is 25 plus fantasy points per game just based on his skill set, his explosiveness. The offensive line is good. He's playing with a quarterback that targeted Todd Gurley 80 plus times in back-to-back seasons. Like Jared Goff was a big reason for that legendary season that Todd Gurley had, and targets are such a big part of it. Would it surprise anybody if DeAndre Swift had 90 targets at the end of the season?
It shouldn't.
It wouldn't surprise me. He was the best pass catcher in that draft class. He was better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
I kind of expect it. Like,
I kind of do too.
You know what I mean? And now, look, you mentioned Bryan Edwards, and I want to, this is a guy that, the analytics community loves, and I'm being a little more cautious, but for this example, he's actually a really good example for kind of what we're trying to teach people here. And this kind of goes in reverse back to the ADP discussion we were having, because it's still, that is very important. First of all, I want to make sure everybody knows. Everybody's like, I see these people posting, and some people even do it in the Fantasy Lounge. But I see people posting on like Fantasy Twitter and Fantasy Facebook and all this kind. Who won the draft? What team do you like most? Who won the draft? Who cares? Who cares who won the draft? Winning the draft is not important. You don't win. What do you win for winning the draft? You get a trophy for that? No. So why do you care if you win the draft? Okay, your commissioner is not doling out. He's not allocating these league-safe winnings because you won the draft. Oh, man, congratulations. A hell of a pick with Travis Etienne in the 7th round. A hell of a pick. No. Okay, so winning the draft doesn't matter. Drafting smarter matters. So if you are using somebody's rankings, like if you're using, Mark doesn't typically make rankings, but if Mark made rankings, maybe he has Bryan Edwards, and he thinks Bryan Edwards is going to finish wide receiver 30, okay? And this is you can kind of use my rankings for this as well, because there's going to be players that I have finishing higher at the end of the season compared to what their current ADP is. Okay, but if we have Bryan Edwards finishing as the wide receiver 30, and that's what we think is going to happen based on offense and situation and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't mean you draft him at wide receiver 30. When you can get him as wide receiver 50, Why are you reaching 20 spots to get a guy, okay, that ESPN rankings we know are not going to be high on? So the noobs and the novice players in your home league are probably not going to be targeting, maybe not even at all. And if you're playing in a league with sharp players, yeah, they may have Bryan Edwards in their draft queue. But that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that you can't, go like 5 spots or something, reach a little bit like you mentioned, but don't reach 20 spots just to get a guy that you think is going to finish the season, because that is extremely bad process. There are players that I think are going to finish I think Devontae Smith could be a league winner this year at wide receiver. I think he could break fantasy from fantasy playoff time until the championship game. But that doesn't mean that I'm drafting him as my wide receiver 2, like in the 4th round. No. So I think people, I kind of wanted to go back to that because I wanted to make sure we cover that. Who cares where you think a guy finishes? There's a lot of people that are in on Adam Troutman. By the way, Mark, I'm kind of. I'm scared here. I'm a little off the
industry's cooling off too.
Yeah,
he was an 11th round pick a month ago, and he's like a 14th round pick on Underdog now. I got him 20 spots past consensus ADP today in a puppy 3 draft.
Yeah, and I
got him like 160th overall.
Because my original thing was like, okay, look, Michael Thomas is out. Marquez Callaway's not exactly an established receiver, although I like him more than Traquan Smith. Traquan Smith's not an established receiver either. Neither one of them have really proven anything. And they really don't have anybody that tied in. Oh, here comes Juwan Johnson, being a converted wide receiver, which scares me in and of itself, being the main pass catcher while Taysom Hill's in the game in the first preseason game. Now, I don't want to overreact to a first preseason game. But look, I'm down to 2 Troutman shares right now, and I have to, even though I may be cooling off on him, I think I may want to keep those 2 shares because I also have to keep in mind there's a possibility, Mark, I might be wrong. You have to account for that possibility. Look, I like to say, I feel like I come off as maybe one of the most arrogant people in the industry, okay? And I sort of embrace that. I feel like I am strong in my convictions, as you know. I wear my opinions on my sleeve. But I'm not so much of an idiot to say I'm going to bat 1,000 this year on players that I think are good, that I like, or that are good at good values. Adam Troutman was coming at a great value. But I might be wrong that he is the main beneficiary of this Michael Thomas pup list visit for 6, 7, 8 weeks, however long it ends up being. It might be Juwan Johnson, and he's obviously free. You know what I mean? So, but I also have to account for the fact that while I'm selling some shares, I also have to account for the fact that I might not be wrong. He might be good, and I want to have some of those just in case he does pop off. But I am cooling off on that. Just so you know, I kind of want to mention that. And I think it kind of goes into what we're talking about a little bit.
We've talked a lot about running backs and win rate, and I think we can do it with wide receiver too. Now, wide receiver, you're going to notice like win rates, the best win rates over the last 6 years or so. I'm using best ball win rates from RotoViz, by the way. And it only goes back to 2015, but we still got a 6-year sample of what types of wide receivers are winning leagues more times than not. And the highest win rate since 2015 for any wide receiver but since 2015 was Doug Baldwin in 2015. He had an ADP of 161, so he was being drafted outside the top 150. He scored 260 fantasy points. So this was, if you had Doug Baldwin that year, you essentially had a 21% chance to win your league. 13% above the baseline. That's fantastic for a wide receiver. So that is my thesis for Bryan Edwards, is like, it's not because I love the player. It's not because I've sat here, grinded the film and gone, yeah, he's good, he's going to score fantasy points. And it's not even because I like his analytics, which obviously I do. I like the breakout age. It's one of the best breakout ages of all time. I like the fact that he was an alpha in college. I like the fact that he was able to command 20% target share while competing with a guy like Deebo Samuel. I love that stuff. But that's like, I've reached a point in my fantasy career now where that stuff is just significantly less important to me, and increasing my win probability is the most important thing. And I take Bryan Edwards because you can draft him outside of wide receiver. He goes at like wide receiver 50, even on Underdog, where wide receiver ADP is more efficient than we've ever seen wide receiver ADP be. You can still get him at like wide receiver 50, wide receiver 55. He's projecting to be the starting wide receiver for this team. Like he's projecting to play 85, 90, 95% snaps, 90% plus route participation. He could be running a route on 95% of Derek Carr's dropbacks. Like, not only could that happen, that is probably the most probable outcome for Bryan Edwards right now, is that he is a full-time starter in this offense. And that's why, like, if he goes for 1,000 yards, he doesn't have to have a 1,400 yard Justin Jefferson season. If he just goes for like 900 or 1,000 yards and catches like 7 or 8 touchdowns, his win rate is going to be north of 15%. Twice above the base, or double the baseline, essentially. That's why I take Bryan Edwards as often as I do, because I think the probability that he is like a wide receiver 2 or even a high-end wide receiver 3 and can go for 900 or 1,000 yards can increase my team's win probability by just so much.
Exactly, and one of our patrons, Jonathan Dow, said this in the chat as well. It's not about knowing who's good and bad. It's about knowing your player pool. Who's in the player know your player universe, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you think who is good and who isn't. It doesn't matter that you think Bryan Edwards is good, right? What matters is being able to assess that player's ranges of outcomes, okay? And I'm more so quoting you on this from the discussion we had yesterday. That's what matters: assessing the player's range of outcomes, determining if it's a sharp pick based on determining if it's a sharp pick at cost based on those potential outcomes. Now, there's a player that you and I both like. We kind of see it a little bit differently, at least in year one, and that's Kyle Pitts, and it's kind of an example of this. And it's kind of a little bit like this general information I just shared, we agree. But with certain players, there is a little bit of gray area, and Kyle Pitts is a good example because for me, we both agree that he's the type of player that at the very least, eventually is going to be a positional advantage at tight end. Now, I don't believe, unless things have changed, I don't believe you think that that's going to be in his range of outcomes in year one. For me, I lean more toward, yes, I do. I am fine. I'm actually comfortable with including him in the bunch of the other 3 positional advantages at tight end, in my opinion, which is Kelce and Waller and TJ Hawkinson this year. I'm fine with saying Kyle Pitts is the 4th guy. Okay, a lot of people are going to say Kittle, but there's other reasons that I don't think that's going to be the case. But I'm fine with including Kyle Pitts because he's the greatest tight end prospect we've ever seen. And I think we have to account for that because he's not just any other first-round tight end he's not just like a guy, a tight end drafted in the first round like Max Williams or Hayden Hurst, right? Like, he is the premier tight end prospect in NFL draft history. And I think that matters for something. So I believe that increases, that in and of itself increases the odds, and the situation that he's in, the fact that Julio's not there, increases his odds that is in his range of outcomes. Okay? So, but like you said, it's not about who you think is good and bad. You also need to assess what the odds of that outcome are. Okay? And even though you like Bryan Edwards, and you might have him finishing, you might say, yeah, I think he is going to get 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he's going to perform well above where I got him as my wide receiver, 5 or 7 or whatever it is. Like, you could probably get him as your 6th, 7th wide receiver right now on your team. But that doesn't mean just because you like him that you have to draft him as your wide receiver 4 to lock him in. You don't have to make bad decisions like that.
Yeah, because you can usually find win rates, or guys that could increase your win probability a little later in the draft. You don't need to keep, just because you're above consensus on a guy doesn't mean you need to make a suboptimal decision. Like players at cost, you need to be able to let players go. And we talked about that earlier. If I have to take Bryan Edwards in the 10th or 11th round to get him, I'm just not going to get him. I'll take Rondale Moore. I can get Rondale Moore in the 10th or 11th round because that's where he's supposed to go. Bryan Edwards is supposed to go in the 13th or 14th round. So if I can't get him there, it's just like, all right, I'll diversify my player pool and I will go somewhere. I will go a different direction with this roster. I can let Bryan Edwards go because there's somebody else out here that could potentially increase my win probability. Wide receiver win rate is just so interesting. Over in 2019, we had two of the best wide receiver win rates, since 2015, just that's in RotoViz's database. That was DJ Chark and Terry McLaurin. These guys who both scored close to 200 fantasy points while being drafted outside the top 200. So that's another thing, is a guy that could occasionally either come off of waivers or a guy that you could draft in the 18th, 19th, 20th round of a league. Some guys, like there are guys that I'm throwing that dart at this year. Olamide Zaccheaus, I've thrown that dart. I think I've got 17 or 18% Olamide Zaccheaus on Underdog. I love to take him in Matt Ryan stacks, but he's a fine pick, I think, outside of Matt Ryan stacks as well. He's a guy who could project to be a starter. Could he get relegated? Yes. Whatever. He could be a low probability to hit. That's fine. But one thing to remember with football and fantasy football is a 20% chance for a certain outcome to happen is actually a pretty high probability. Like a 20% chance is obviously okay. It's lower than a 50 or 60% chance, or a 50 or 60% outcome. Fine. But you can absorb that 20% chance because people see that 15 or 20% probability and think that's never going to happen. No, that's not how that works. That still happens 15 to 20 times out of 100 or 2 times out of 10. This still happens. It's still very possible. And the rest comes down to variance at that point. It depends on which direction the variance falls, and you can't control that. But you can embrace that variance and try and find hits and find fantasy points where other people are not. If you find 200 fantasy points in the 18th round, you are the only guy in your league that did.
Yeah.
You are probably the only guy in your league that did. And that gives you so much leverage because nobody else found those fantasy points. Nobody else found that contribution to their team that late in the draft. So it gives you so much more leverage. And that's where my DFS concepts that I've learned over the last 2 years come into play in seasonal leagues, is you're still trying to find leverage over your league mates. You're still trying to exploit the mistakes that they make. You're not trying to pick the best players and play the best plays to win. You're trying to exploit the mistakes your league mates make.
Yeah, and another thing is I want to mention is just because you may not like a player, like I understand the love for Bryan. Like I get it. I'm not a Bryan Edwards. I don't hate Bryan Edwards. I want to make sure, but I don't, love Bryan Edwards. I would say like you do. If it comes down and these guys are going, there's a 3-spot variance between these guys. Wide receiver 57, Marquez Callaway, and wide receiver 60, Bryan Edwards. Like, okay, which one do I think is going to have a better season? Marquez Callaway. But just because I don't like Bryan, maybe somebody snipes Marquez Callaway. It's it's the last pick in the draft. Okay, it's last round, last pick in the draft. Somebody snipes Marquez Callaway, and I'm sitting there, kind of need a wide receiver. A.J. Green's there. Gabriel Davis is there. T.Y. Hilton's there. Bryan Edwards is there. Okay. Are we going to put that much trust into T.Y. Hilton? What's his ceiling? Gabriel Davis, Emmanuel Sanders is there, correct? Like, what is his ceiling? Like his ceiling is sort of capped now. AJ Green, we're not worried about AJ Green, right? We've read the book on that. We know how that's probably gonna end. He's 33 years old. Okay. Why would you not? Even if you don't like Bryan Edwards, you've got to swallow your pride and say, look, and I've done it a couple times. And I've even added Bryan Edwards, and I showed you proof. Like, you got to swallow your pride and say, yeah, I don't think he's likely to break out, but it's the last pick in the damn draft, so who cares? Like, it's an upside pick. What if Darren Waller, and you know me, so I don't have a problem putting this out in the universe because I am not a superstitious person. I'm a little stitious, but I'm not what if Darren Waller gets hurt tomorrow? He's out for the year. Who's going to get at the targets? Mark? Is Henry Ruggs really going to be a volume hog? Probably not. Is it going to be John?
Could be
John Brown? Probably not. Bryan Edwards, all the way to the moon at that point. So, like, there's a possibility. You have to account for that. Okay? And if Bryan Edwards is like the 5th receiver on the team, it's a different story. Maybe like last year, it's a different story. But now he's projected to be the starting one of the starting 2 wide receivers. Like, yeah, he's not going to be top 1 on the he may not even be second on the totem pole in targets. He might be third. And if something happens to Darren Waller, well, guess what? Bryan Edwards is there, and now you just locked him in with your last pick. Now, you might end up dropping him, by week 4. Who knows? But just because you don't like a player doesn't mean that you shouldn't take a chance. Now, there's always going to be players that we are probably, for the most part, going to be like, no, staying away from. Like we're not really going out and being shares of like AJ Green in seasonal leagues, are we? No. Right? Like, I would venture to say you and I, but I know I don't. I would venture to say you'd have 0 shares of AJ Green in a seasonal managed league.
No, I definitely have some AJ. Oh, okay. Seasonal managed league? No, I would not draft AJ Green.
Exactly.
I have some AJ Green in best ball and some Kyler Murray stacks.
Yes. But like these are like guys like that have a high, not like AJ Green, like Bryan Edwards going in this range. Bryan Edwards, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who we know now has been running with the ones the majority of camp. It looks like Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be a day 1 starter. And keep in mind, nobody saw Terry McLaurin's breakout coming, did we? No.
I did.
Well, okay. But nobody thought that he was going to turn into Terry McScorin. Like, not that quickly.
No, nobody thought he was going to be F1 that quick.
Right. Amon-Ra St. Brown that's in his range of outcomes. He could turn into a Terry McLaurin type of player in year 1. There's nobody else other than TJ Hawkinson, but there's got to be another person taking those receiver targets. Amon-Ra St. Brown could be that guy. So you're getting him as wide receiver 61, Bryan Edwards wide receiver 60, Terrace Marshall wide receiver 59, and Marquez Callaway at 57. So these are guys at the last pick of the draft. Even if you don't like them, you can take a shot. Like that is a smart way to play. Don't play based on team bias or by feeling, right? Like, you can have convictions. That's fine. I have plenty of them. But don't let them rule the way that you draft, the way that you play, the way that you run your waiver wire, right? Like, don't let that happen.
I just realized there was one more running back I wanted to talk about after DeAndre Swift that I think has an elite legendary ceiling. Like, I could maybe be talked off of this ledge. It's just something I've been thinking about recently, and I've been taking him more and more because I don't think his ADP is efficient enough. And it's Darrell Henderson. Like, do you think Darrell Henderson has it in his range of outcomes? Like, look at what's behind him. It's Xavier Jones, Jake Funk, these guys who I've literally never heard of. And apparently Xavier Jones and Jake Funk truthers exist. I didn't know they were a thing, but apparently they exist. I had never heard of these guys until Cam Akers got hurt. But just knowing what's behind him, and the season starts in 2 weeks. And the Rams haven't brought anybody in to compete with Darrell Henderson. Is there a real possibility that Darrell Henderson is just playing 80 or 90% snaps? Because I think there is. And you're getting him at the 4 or 5 turn now. And his ADP should have went higher. See, I disagree. I don't think it's too rich. I was ready to be completely out on Darrell Henderson because I thought he was going to get pushed into the 3rd round where I would just be taking DeAndre Swift over him every time. But now it's like, okay, Darrell Henderson or Travis Etienne. Okay, now I actually have to think about this. Like, Travis Etienne, I love him. He's got great upside. His ceiling is massive, but we know he's going to be competing with James Robinson for at least the first half of the season. Darrell Henderson's not competing with anybody, and he could be on a really productive offense. He could be playing 80 or 90% snaps. He could be seeing 4 or 5 targets a game. That could happen. That could happen, and he could be the guy. He could be the had to have him guy. He could be the 30% win rate or 25% win rate guy just because there's nobody else there. He's explosive. He caught passes in college. I feel like his ADP didn't correct enough.
You know that when Cam Akers was healthy, I was saying, look, I think Darrell Henderson's going to be more involved in this offense than a lot of people think. But it doesn't seem to me like Sean McVay likes him all that much for whatever reason. Like, it just doesn't seem. It doesn't seem that, like, I get, and I'm not as Jake Funk, Xavier Jones. Like, I'm not one of the reasons that Xavier Jones and Jake Funk are like trending on, Player Profiler or Sleeper. But like, I do. I tend to think that, not Jake Funk, but I tend to think that Xavier Jones is going to be heavily involved. I don't think Sean McVay, I honestly think he has learned from the Todd Gurley days. I don't, and even the can't make, like, I don't think he is going to commit to one guy being an absolute workhorse. I just don't. I really think they want to get Xavier Jones involved in this offense. I don't see that in his range. I don't. I mean, look, anything can happen, I guess, if you're getting a 90% snap share and like the 10% is Xavier and Jake, but I don't. You kind of lost me on that one.
I don't know what Sean McVay is thinking. I don't know.
I
don't know. And the fact they didn't bring in anybody, and I expected them to. I figured we would see some dusty old running back come into this backfield and start competing with Darrell Henderson, but like that never happened. So they're literally relying on guys who have like never played NFL football before to compete for touches with Darrell Henderson, who is explosive, who has ripped off splash plays and looked impressive in the past. We've seen it happen. And these guys are just expected to compete with him right away and make Darrell Henderson a 50% or 60% snap share guy, which is like, he's being drafted as if he's only going to play 50 or 60% of the snaps. And it's like, there's nobody else. He could play 80 or 90%. That could happen. And that's why I feel like he should be more expensive than he is. And I think his ADP is still inefficient.
Yeah, he's going as RB20 right now. So he's going like
it's too low.
Three spots below
Darrell Henderson or Miles Sanders.
See, you did that on purpose. You did that.
I'm getting okay, but
you did that on purpose because you know, Mark, that I am. You slide up. You know that I'm not big on Miles Sanders.
I'm getting to the point, and you know that I have placed a lot. I have a lot of money on Miles Sanders this year, so you know that like I'm getting to the point where I want to take Darrell Henderson over Miles Sanders.
I would take Darrell Henderson. I would, but.
I wouldn't.
But
I'm getting to the point where I want to as well.
He's going 4 spots behind DeAndre Swift. I'm not. There's no way in teetotal hell that I'm taking Darrell Henderson over DeAndre Swift. But like, here's the thing: am I even taking him over Chris Carson?
That's tough. I would. I think I would because I don't think Chris Carson's ever going to play like 90% snaps. I think he'll have some games where he plays like 80%, but over the course of a full season, he's going to be closer to a 60, 65. Maybe 70% snap share player. And there's a good ceiling there for him. So Chris Carson's a fine pick, but I would, in the 4th round, I'm taking Darrell Henderson over David Montgomery and Chris Carson every time.
I have Darrell Henderson just inside my top 25 running backs. I have him finishing the season right inside the top 25. I think he can. So obviously I don't expect him to outperform this RB20 ADP, because I do personally believe Xavier Jones is going to be involved. I thought this is always going to be a committee, and that doesn't change just because Cam Akers is out. For me, I do think he could outperform his ADP. Obviously, good offensive line, good offense. I think he could outperform this ADP, but I don't think he's going to outperform it and become RB6. I think we could maybe see RB13, 12, maybe 12, maybe a low-end RB1. But I just don't know. I don't think the odds are there for me, man. I really don't.
I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know. Obviously it's a low probability thing. Like, him being a league winner is lower probability. It's just I don't know. I don't know what it is because I don't know what Sean McVay is thinking. Darrell Henderson could play 45, 50% snaps, and Xavier Jones could be a potential league winner, or Darrell Henderson could literally never leave the field, and he could be the guy you had to have.
Yeah. He's interesting because, like you said, we just don't know. Like, nobody heard of Xavier Jones. Like, those of us who watch like a lot of college football, yeah, we've heard of Xavier Jones. But most people had never heard of Xavier Jones. Like, the casual fan, Xavier Jones, the casual fan, Jake Funk, who are these guys? So you just assume, I've never heard of them, they must not be good. But like, we see this all the time. And here's a point. To think about. We probably all thought that when Leonard Fournette left Jacksonville, we probably all thought that somebody was going to come in there and compete with James Robinson. Nobody did it, and James Robinson finished the season as RB7. So like, If that happens and James Robinson can do it with that workload that he got, and Darrell Henderson gets that same workload behind a better offensive line with a better quarterback on a better team with better coaching, I mean, God, yes. I mean, it's possible, Mark. Damn it, I don't like ceding to you, but it's possible. It's possible.
What do you think, man? You ready for an after party?
Let's do an after party. Let's do it. Let's
I'm
do
having
an
a
after
tough
party.
See, those who know me, like I've said many times, I work construction. Obviously, that's why I wear my Pit Vipers. These are the ones I wear to work every day. Like, if you look at them, they're really beat the hell up. I don't know how good my quality is because I have slow internet, so you probably couldn't see. But I swear a lot. I have a foul mouth, and I'm not ashamed of it. It's who I am, and I like the after parties because I get to swear, I get to curse, and I can't curse on a live stream.
We get to do it. Damn it! That's about as far as I can go here.
Watch your mouth, Chris. This is a family show.
It's a filthy show. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Guys, thank you so much for watching as well. We will be back next week. Obviously, you guys are wonderful. Anybody that gave some of us some live comments in the chat, I'll answer those. We'll try to answer those once we get out of here. I want to leave you with a name, Mark. Michael Strawn is the dynasty name you need to know. Stash him.
I have one more. Don't hit that button. Colin Johnson. There we go. I'm done.
Ooh.